Monster Professor.
Welcome to the Monster Professor, a show in which we discuss and explore monsters in literature, myth, film, games, folklore, culture, and beyond. I'm your host, Josh Woods, author, editor, professor, and monster expert. And if you're listening to this at about the time it came out, then it's the day before Halloween 2021. I wanted to get just one more quick episode in before Halloween is over. And what better time than to talk about this great cinematic achievement we have in the 1978 John Carpenter's Halloween. I've talked about it a little bit in different ways before. I've definitely never dedicated a whole episode to it. I'm going to here in a very informal way. So really my goals are only two. One, I want to tell you why I love it so much or what I think is so good about it. And we'll maybe explore some perhaps deeper ideas that were intended or accidental. Either way, they're in there in the film. And then I also have in mind kind of an audience, not so much those of you who are already Halloween experts and Halloween geeks and nerds. I'm not sure there will be much in this episode that will be new to you, but I have half in mind the audience that I keep running into, when I stumble into making Halloween references in one conversation or another, or I'm wearing something that is a Halloween reference. I'll run into people who mention like, "Oh, Halloween? No, I don't get into Texas Chainsaw Massacre and that kind of thing," as if the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween are anything close to the same species of movie. I don't think they are. Um, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was, I mean, it is an interesting thing, and it was a low budget thing made by young people, when horror wasn't necessarily that thing. It was a middle-aged or older person's genre. Like the main characters were fully established adults in horror up till that point. They were, I don't think, I can't think before Texas Chainsaw Massacre of horror films being made by small groups of young people that made feature film level. So yeah, it was influential, or it altered the genre in a whole bunch of ways, but it's a very different kind of experience watching 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think if we're gonna say what the 1978 John Carpenter's Halloween is. By the way, am I expecting you to have seen this movie before I'm talking about it? No, not necessarily, but it's impossible to spoil it. The movie doesn't function on surprises, I don't think. I love it more and more every time I rewatch it, and nothing in it is new to me, yet I keep seeing more and more that I've never noticed before every time I watch it. So maybe you've seen it before, maybe seen it and forgotten about it, or you want to pay more attention. Maybe you've never seen it before at all. That's fine with me. So back to the comparison to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That one's rather gruesome, although it shows less than it makes you think it shows. But anyway, I think the '78 Halloween is closer to the kind of movie that Jaws is, Spielberg's 1975 Jaws, in how it functions, that there is lurking death under the surface everywhere, and in some way you're battling the belief of the people who are subject to this lurking death, and in some ways you're seeking where it is, except rather than looking at the surface of the water wondering where under that surface this lurking death is, you're looking into the shadows and the corners and the behind the hedges and down the streets of an idyllic little Midwest town, Haddonfield, Illinois. And so the setting is another part we've got to talk about. I should say, if I'm starting off with comparisons like been doing here, really, I guess it's what like cinematic genealogical lineage does the Halloween 1978 fit into? Probably the 1960 Hitchcock film Psycho. I guess that is its father or its grandfather. Um, so much so that John Carpenter wanted to cast the daughter of the real shining star of Psycho, not the shining, well, kind of the screaming star of Psycho, um, the Janet Leigh. He wanted to cast her daughter as the lead in this movie about somebody who's a psycho killer. And so he did. He cast Jamie Lee Curtis, the daughter of Janet Leigh and Tony Curtis. Talk about an awesome set of parents that you have there if you're into the movie world. Um, not her earliest role, but her first real main role, and it may be her first starring role. She had a small part or two. She was still in high school, playing a high school girl, which is quite rare, I think, in horror movies. Normally, mid 20s to early 30s are the high school kids in horror movies. Um, so, well, there are other Psycho comparisons as well, but as amazing as Psycho was, that was made by a master at the height of his craft with a hefty budget and some real professionals around him. And Halloween 1978 was made on next to no money whatsoever. It would be less than micro budget. It'd be micro budget. It was made on very little, and by a group of people who weren't really much more than film students, or in some ways still film students, in a very small little crew. So little money that every crew member had to do multiple jobs. John Carpenter himself had to write, direct, do the music. um, every actor had to just wear their own clothes in the movie. There was no money in the budget for wardrobe. You just had to come dressed as you think that character would dress, right? John Carpenter famously only got $1,000 for the movie, although a percentage, total budget being $300,000. And I think most of that probably went to Donald Pleasance, the fantastic actor who plays the Van Helsing type, the one who's after the Michael Myers character. So I guess I should back out to more like what's the film about and what makes it so great. Okay, so you've got you follow from the eyes of the murderer, a mask wearing murderer at the beginning, and then it's revealed that it's actually some cherubic little child, this boy who is Michael Myers, who has brutally slaughtered his sister. And then we jump to 1978 in this little Illinois town, Haddonfield. It's completely fictional. Well, not completely, that's the wrong word for it. I think there are several towns in Illinois that actually look quite a lot like like the Illinois town they're trying to portray. They filmed it in California, but they convinced me it's a small town in Illinois because I know some that look like this. Some people say they can spot like a palm tree in the background. If you're trying to do that, you're working very hard to see past greatness into the tiniest little cracks in the statue. Um, it is, and it's this beautiful setting. They spend so much time with it. It can't, why else can it get lumped in with Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Very few people die, but there's no rape, there's no torture, there's very few kills, and there's barely any blood at all. I am almost ready to say that there's no blood, but there are probably some drops or splatters of blood a little bit on a person, like on the arm or something like that. But really, it's not, there's no gore in this movie. And between the first murder that sets up kind of the backstory at the beginning and the first murder that happens in our main in the let's say the sujet. Well, that's a very nerdy way to say it. The story that's presented to us in what feels like our real time story. Between those two murders, there's 50 minutes where there's no killing whatsoever. 50 minutes where most of it we're just walking around the town with Jamie Lee Curtis as this babysitter and these other two girls that are barely babysitters. it was originally titled The Babysitter Murders, or that's at least what the production company wanted. And I'm glad they didn't stick with that for several reasons. One of which is only one babysitter gets murdered, and she only gets murdered after she stopped babysitting. So it's like half a babysitter murder. Um, the but it's not just the setting, it's how they handle it. They take these wide shots across the town that give you a sense that and then they've got this floating cam that follows the girls while they're walking around town. it it gives you this great sense of fall or of autumn, of just being around in walking, strolling through one of these nice little towns. It's so pleasant and charming to, and then they've, and the original cinematographer wanted these wide shots. John Carpenter did too. Or director of photography and John Carpenter, and both wanted these wide shots because they wanted you thinking, he could be anywhere. He wanted your eyes to be working all over the screen. Like, where is the boogeyman? Where is the shape? And it starts building suspense more and more with sound, but also visually. And that every now and then he would just be standing over there. If you're watching closely in the background, you can kind of catch a glimpse of the boogeyman. In the film, they keep calling him the boogeyman. And in the final credits, they call him the shape. Although the Donald Pleasance character, Dr. Loomis, keeps referring to him as Michael Myers, thinking that he's this escaped patient. So that's the next stage in what happens in the plot. There's a breakout at the mental institution, and Michael Myers, who Dr. Loomis was trying to get locked up for all time, was getting transferred to something that's less high security. And Loomis has been trying to stop this. And then, of course, he breaks out and gets out at Halloween night. But I think it's kind of a mistake to think that Michael Myers is the killer. The shape is the killer once he has his mask and once he is in Haddonfield. It's not Michael Myers anymore. I think it's better to think of it in a kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. When he's Mr. Hyde, he's not Dr. Jekyll. He is something else. Um, that's not to say that the shape character, the boogeyman, isn't human. It's not a supernatural movie, not like Nightmare on Elm Street, not like the later Friday the 13th. He's not supernatural, but he's not purely human. This isn't like Psycho, or this isn't like Silence of the Lambs. The shape, the boogeyman, he is, I think, somehow mythological, or he stands around as this, that weird, if you heard a weird sound, it's this cat that can't stand to be away from me when I'm recording a podcast. So you've got the cat close to the mic, just enjoying life. And here I am petting it like, like the Donald Pleasance villain in the James Bond movie, actually. Although the image you might know better as Dr. Evil, where they're making fun of Dr. Pleasance, or Donald Pleasance's main role. Where was I? Oh, okay. so I think it's somewhere else. It's not just a human serial killer. When I hear people, even when I hear myself trying to technically describe the Michael Myers thing as a serial killer thing, it never feels right. I don't like it really. And he's not a supernatural killer. He is closer to something that in the deep folk tale. So in the way that we have like these archetypical shapes in these ancient folk tales, or something close to mythological, that's what we're looking at when we look at the image of the Grim Reaper. It's touching on something, I think, more than just a skeleton in a cloak. And I think it's touching on something more than simply a supernatural incident. It's it's a walking symbol of something deep, and I think they achieved that so well, accidentally in many ways, probably, when they took famously a Captain Kirk mask from just some general store, painted it white, changed the hair a little bit, and realized they were dealing with not a human face, but something that was like the shape of a human face. It's like the blank canvas of what a face might be before it's a true human, in the way that he's walking around and as the shape of what a human might be if this being were something kind of like a universal pre-painted canvas. Before you get a true human being, you have the shape of a human being. I think so. Accidentally, maybe, I don't know, when in the credits when they call him the shape, I think they're getting to something. Well, I think they're getting at it. I think that's the one of the best words to use. I mean, the word shape comes from an old English word, and it originally meant something like, it's a pretty old word, and originally meant something like raw human features. It wasn't only like shape as in the shape of a tree or shape of a rock. It originally had these connotations of creation, but also of human creation, like the raw form of human features, or the contours of the human body is what shape originally meant. And weirdly, and the Old English was something like, I'm going to mispronounce it for those of you who are old English experts out there, something like Geskep, Geskep, something like this. The GE, what is the now the equivalent in Latin letters of GESCEAP. Uh, so it not only meant like these, the form of human features, and the form of something that is crafted, created, or begotten. It also meant destiny. Can you believe that? It also meant something like your destiny, which is at the heart of what Halloween is about. This was destined to happen, despite Dr. Loomis's best efforts to try to keep the human version of the shape, Michael Myers, locked up before he could get out, put on the mask, and then be incarnated as the boogeyman. I'm gonna drink coffee here. They keep calling him the boogeyman in the movie over and over again, as if this is the kind of running folktale symbol that they're using for this impending death or this impending doom that you can't get away from. You can't hide from the boogeyman. He will find you. You can't kill the boogeyman. And so, in that kind of dark destiny way, you've got, I think you can call him the boogeyman or the shape. Boogeyman is an old word too. I think it's first attested, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, 16th century. Pretty old word. No, I guess that's actually kind of new, isn't it? It was not till like 1840 it meant something closer like to the devil. In 1857 it shows up in print meaning something like a person of dread or an object of dread, as a bogey or a bogey man. And in America, we've been saying boogie man for a while. It was originally something closer to bogey man. Um, but like, well, I keep saying it's something like folktale and universal. I think theme wise, Carpenter and crew were really trying to figure out like what is the nature of your inevitable demise? Like eh, what does it mean that it's out there waiting to get you? And what about the not just your inevitable demise, like a peaceful, happy death one day in bed after living a long, happy life, but what about the evil out there trying to get you? And can something that should be human be turned to something that's truly soullessly evil? Um, and so, in the sense that there's this impending death waiting for you in the shadows everywhere, that's another way in which it's not like a lot of those other killer movies, even though the shape does end up being kind of this clodding, the slow moving, mechanical, almost zombie like, golem like killer that comes at you. It's something closer to like inevitability, not needing to rush as it gets you because it's going to get you. But the tone of the movie is something of the shape just hiding in the shadows, waiting for a moment, hiding even from people that present no danger to it. In this film, since it's not inhuman or it's not supernatural, the shape, the boogeyman, he can be hurt. He is hurt in the movie. He can be killed. He can be knocked down. He can be caught. And you strip him of his mask, and then he's just Michael Myers again, the human, but with the mask, he is still something unhuman, but he will hide. That's one of the things that they get so wrong in some of the later films. I almost don't want to call them films by the time you get to Halloween 4 or 5 or H2O or, oh, they're awful. And then the newest Halloween Kills, when he's like the Terminator in the middle of a crew out in the open, out in the light where everybody can see him, and he's just destroying them all one by one, totally gets everything wrong in the tone of what the 1978 Halloween was. He would hide in the shadows and would stay hidden for longer than necessary because you just don't know, because it's not just the machine there to kill. It's something like a universal idea of this death that will emerge from the shadows when it will, and doesn't want to be seen otherwise. And the seeing thing and seeing the shape coming for you, seeing it out in the open, that's another thing that I think separates it from the other, say, slashers the 1978 gets compared to. Something like the Friday the 13th movies, or the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, or any of these things. Is that he will, or the surprisingly good Hatchet films with Victor Crowley in it. These those killers cannot just walk down the street in the middle of the suburbs or in the middle of your town or city. Everybody will freak out because they look like monsters. But the shape was just standing around in broad daylight, walking around in town, in kind of a dormant state in the shape of a regular human being. And so he can blend in, especially on Halloween Day. Even Freddy Krueger couldn't really blend in on Halloween Day. But the shape could. And that's another theme that this film keeps playing with. Like, with all of us wearing various kinds of masks in the world, in life, which one of those mask wearing people around you is the true monster? Which one is wearing a mask because that's a monster rather than wearing a mask just because we're all willing to overlook him, right? Or we're all, well, that's another thing, isn't it? Well, like, the shape works because of our tendency or our willingness to overlook the idea of true evil in the world. You're like, oh, everybody's just, we all wear some kind of mask. Yeah, but of all of us wearing some kind of mask in life, one of us isn't. One of us is the true monster. And this movie does it so well. So with that slow pacing, that just, at least for me, takes me into this world. For however long it runs, hour and a half, something like this, the movie. I live in Haddonfield for that amount of time, once or twice a year, every single year. Sometimes more than that. I am embarrassed to admit. And they get it with this setting. They get it with that cinematography that they play with, but the lighting too, the way they work with these heavy shadows. If you know the film well, I'll remind you of this moment where Jamie Lee Curtis is with her back to a closet, kind of looking out around the room, trying to see if she can spot the boogeyman, and in the pitch black dark behind it, this white face emerges closer and closer from behind. A brilliant effect, lighting effect that they made with very little money. I mean, they had so little money that they had the part of the reason for all the heavy shadows and the high contrast in the film was the fact that they couldn't afford more lighting. and but still they get these, like, during the day they play with these orange tones with light, and during the night I I almost want to say they pioneered the blue light night, but I'm sure many of you who know your film history well can point out to examples previous to 1978 in which blue light and heavy shadows are used for night. I can't think of any, but surely there are. Well, they didn't pioneer it. Well, if they didn't invent it, they did some pioneering work with that, because the lighting they use to tell the story and how they do it, it's just, oh, it's just so well done, and it's so satisfying to see. And the sound, you can't get away from how good that soundtrack is that John Carpenter created. He got his music education from his father, a music professor down in Bowling Green, Kentucky. That's where John Carpenter, not born and not established his career, but where he grew up in his formative years. He's a Kentucky boy at heart, and he created that brilliant soundtrack. I want to play it for you here, but I'll probably just get shut down by YouTube bots for using copyrighted music. It's I know very little about music, so I'm just told, and I'll have to trust what I'm told, that it's written in a very rare time, a 5/4 time. That do 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 do. That there. Let's see. I'm told that the only other cinematic theme or score that is in 5/4 time is the Mission Impossible theme. I think both of those kind of build the nervous tension quite well, or they're intended to. Although this one does it with this beautiful. Oh, after that kind of almost insect-like nervous tension is building up, and the scratches and the piano playing. Then there comes this fuller swelling sound that to me feels like Bach, or gives me that feeling that Bach makes me feel. Again, I know nothing about music, so that all might just sound sound like complete nonsense to you. But it's absolutely, oh, it's so great. Um, and oh god, well, I'm already close to 30 minutes. I wanted to keep it under 30 minutes. Maybe just a few extra little tidbits I think that are so cool when you're watching this movie. You've got, it works in so many ways. You've got the monster, you've got the girls who are the victims, and then you've got, you know although this film didn't invent this concept of the final girl, you could say, well, that was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Okay, well, whatever. Um, the people didn't really start feeling like it was the final girl until the Jamie Lee Curtis in this one. But you also have the Van Helsing character, so excellently done by, played by Donald Pleasance, and he perhaps had a sense of what true evil was when World War II started breaking out. He was a conscientious objector. He did not want to partake in the violence of World War, however justified. And then the Luftwaffe started bombing London, and he was seeing his own people murdered by death from the sky, and he volunteered to get in there and fight the Nazis. And he flew a bunch of missions and was finally shot down, captured, and thrown into a POW camp. So he's a prisoner of war by either the regular German army or actual Nazis. I'm still not really clear on the distinction, even if there is one. But he has been around and has seen true evil in one form or another as a real person, and he comes in to play this role, and he gets it, and I think he helped John Carpenter make this film in many ways. He's like, they wanted to give this Dr. Loomis character who's on the hunt for the shape, trying to stop him before he kills or kills more, and he's just passionately, psychotically dedicated to eradicating this true evil. At the same time, trying to convince people this is not just uh, a mentally ill patient. This is not just a criminal. This is not even just a murderer. This is someone that has nothing but true evil in his eyes. You know, he saw him for years staring at the wall, not staring at the wall, staring through the wall to this night when he gets to come home and kill again. And he's just trying to convince the sheriff and everybody else in town that this thing is true evil and we have to do everything in our power to stop it. And they even had a backstory written for him where he was supposed to call home, talk to his wife or something. And Donald Pleasance is like, no, we can't do that scene. He needs to be abstract in the kind of the way the shape is. He has to have no backstory, no family, no history. He exists purely to hunt this thing, in the way that, say, Van Helsing or Ahab was. What is the formula that this whole kind of monster and the Van Helsing Ahab hunter character and the final girl hold? I think Dracula, the Bram Stoker book, I think that one established that. I mean, wasn't Mina Harker the original final girl? If we're gonna say final girl is a thing, and you had the Loomis Van Helsing, the Dracula shape, and the Mina Laurie, kind of as the key pivotal characters for all three. That's how I say it anyway. But they do such a great job of showing how unintentionally close Dr. Loomis is to the kind of being that the shape is in his like single-minded obsession with stopping him, so much so that he's hiding by the old Myers house watching, staking out, trying to see if he can spot the shape coming back home. And then he sees these other kids kind of playing around in front of the legendary spook house, and he does this like voice where he tries to scare them off as a monster, and he does, and they freak out. He's the voice from the darkness that threatens them, and then they freak out and run away. And his face is just filled with this delight of this Halloween prank that he's pulled, but a Halloween prank that he's pulled in which he plays the monster. That he's hiding out there with a gun behind kids, threatening them from the darkness, and then getting delight in it. That's pretty darn close to being a monster, at least playing with the idea of the monster. And then he turns around and is scared himself by the sheriff's presence, wondering what the hell he's doing right now. Oh, so good. So many good things. And, and so was this, I almost want to run through kind of a systematic criteria of explaining how this thing is one of the great cinematic achievements in the 20th century in American film, and maybe more than that. I think nearly by every standard, this succeeds or defeats what would be comparable films. But rather than that, maybe I'll just say um, Psycho is appreciated, but not influential. I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre was pioneering, but not influential. This movie, I think, was influential. And as soon as this movie came out and hit its success, that's when the era of the slasher began as imitation of this. That's where you get the Jason, Friday the 13th, and the Nightmare on Elm Street, and then the 500 other slashers that came out immediately afterward, trying to imitate the success of this. But it wasn't just that. It was, and well, everybody else keeps trying to follow the rules that Halloween 1978 did. They just amp it up and make the killer even not universal or in this high archetype way, but instead merely supernatural. And that's why they're all inferior to this, I think, in many ways. But it was even influential beyond what might be seen as the slasher or horror genre. Like, you get James Cameron's version of the Terminator, this relentless, unliving, slow clodding death that just cannot be stopped. You get that because of the way that they portrayed the shape, which is not this hot blooded murderer like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and not this guy who's actually just a real messed up dude with a mental illness like in Psycho. Not like not like a demon in The Exorcist or a pure beast like in Jaws. It was something that no one had really done like this before. And it was something else other than the Frankenstein. Although I think the Frankenstein image or the golem image is is what it's taking part in. That's kind of the shape it's drawing from. But the slow, curious, cold head tilt, or this cold curiosity about how fragile human life is after he's just murdered the boyfriend and pinned him to the wall like a butterfly, or after he seems to be dead and defeated, then he sits up mechanically, bending only at the waist like a robot or like some sort of inhuman wooden puppet, and then he turns and moves so mechanically that where do you think James Cameron started getting his horror image of this machine that just keeps coming and can't be stopped? As so many people haven't been able to get away from this kind of thing. John Carpenter keeps claiming to want to distance himself from it and to think little of it. Perhaps because so many people call it an accidental masterpiece, and perhaps that's an insult to him. Maybe because he's been wanting, he claims, to make more political, high minded films. But if you watch what he's good at and what he does, I don't buy any of that for a second. I just think he says that stuff to keep his Hollywood dinner party friends. Um, I think what you're dealing with in Halloween 1978 is a cinematic masterpiece, and it doesn't have to be merely categorized as a slasher any more than The Godfather is just another crime film, or Moby Dick is a book about fishing. I think sure it is a slasher. If so, it's the greatest one. But what it true sure it's a horror film. But if so, it might be. I'll just say my favorite, because if I'm gonna say it's the best, then lots of people who love Shining or Night of the Living Dead or Exorcist or Psycho or any of those things, they'll come at me and stab at me like The Shape would. I think there are great arguments to be made for all of those, which are masterpieces. But 1978, low budget, out of the blue, perhaps accidental, but deeply mythological in its visual imagery and just everything done so well, from lighting to sound to shots to setting to character to keeping the plot simple, straightforward, and moving forward. And man, what a masterpiece that thing is. So if you haven't enjoyed it or you weren't sure how to enjoy it, there you go. That's your guide. Way longer than I meant to, as usual. I'm just gonna cut it off here. So, if you've made it this far, you survived another episode of The Monster Professor, and I hope you have a happy Halloween.